The deafening crack of a gunshot echoed through the dusty saloon as Ryder Daniels stared down at the fallen body of the outlaw who just challenged him to a duel. He didn't feel triumph or relief, just the same hollow emptiness that had been his constant companion for the past 3 years. The crowd that had gathered to watch the showdown parted like the Red Sea as Ryder holstered his Colt .45 and made his way to the bar. "Whiskey," he muttered, not bothering to look the bartender in the eye. The year was 1878, and Sweetwater, Wyoming was just another stop on Ryder's aimless journey through the frontier. At 32 years old, he'd been riding for so long he could hardly remember what it felt like to call someplace home. The bartender slid a glass across the worn wooden counter. "That's the third man you've put down this month, Daniels," sheriff starting to ask questions. Ryder tossed back the amber liquid in one swift motion, welcoming the familiar burn. "Man drew first. I just finished what he started." "Maybe so," the bartender replied, refilling his glass without being asked, "but folks are wondering if you're looking to die out here." The question hung in the air, unanswered because Ryder himself didn't know. Ever since he'd lost his wife and young son to a cholera outbreak in '75, he'd been riding without purpose, taking odd jobs as a hired gun or cattle driver. Some days he woke up hoping a bullet would find him, other days he just kept breathing out of sheer stubbornness. "Got a room upstairs?" Ryder asked, changing the subject. "Last one on the left, $2 a night." Ryder placed the coins on the counter and grabbed the bottle. "I'll take the bottle too." Sleep came fitfully that night, as it always did. Dawn broke with Ryder already awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of his rented room. The town of Sweetwater was stirring to life outside his window, merchants opening shops, ranch hands heading out for the day's work, women hanging laundry to dry in the morning sun. After splashing cold water on his face and running a hand through his dark, unkempt hair, Ryder decided it was time to move on. Sweetwater had nothing for him, just like every other town he'd passed through in recent years. He was halfway through saddling his chestnut mare when the commotion started. A wagon was racing into town, the driver whipping the horses into a frantic pace. Behind it trailed a cloud of dust that marked its urgency. Doc Wilson. The driver shouted as he pulled the wagon to a halt outside the town physician's office. "Doc Wilson, come quick." Curiosity, one of the few emotions Ryder still allowed himself, drew him closer. The driver, a weathered man in his 50s, jumped down from his seat and rushed to the back of the wagon. "What happened, Thomas?" Doc Wilson asked, emerging from his office with his medical bag. "It's my niece, Eliza. She came out from Boston last month to help with my wife and the children. Found her this morning, burning up with fever, can't hardly breathe." The man's voice cracked with worry. "Sarah's looking after the little ones, couldn't come with me." Ryder watched as they carefully lifted a young woman from the wagon bed. Her face was flushed with fever, her chestnut hair damp with sweat. Even in her unconscious state, there was something about her that made Ryder pause. Maybe it was the delicate curve of her jaw or the peaceful expression on her face despite her illness. "Bring her inside," Doc Wilson instructed, holding the door open. "Looks like pneumonia, maybe worse." As they carried her past, Ryder caught a glimpse of her pale hand hanging limply at her side. Something twisted in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation he couldn't immediately identify. "Need any help?" he found himself asking, surprising both the doctor and himself. Doc Wilson gave him a curious look. "Actually, yes. Thomas needs to get back to his family. I could use someone to fetch water and help me cool her down." Before he could reconsider, Ryder nodded. "I'll tie up my horse." Inside the doctor's office, Eliza Calloway was laid gently on a cot. Up close, Ryder could see she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 or so. Her breathing came in labored gasps, each one seeming more difficult than the last. "She needs to be kept cool," Doc Wilson explained, rolling up his sleeves. "There's a well out back. Fill that bucket and bring it here." For the next few hours, Ryder worked alongside the doctor, fetching fresh water, helping to change compresses, and holding Eliza up when the coughing fits racked her body. It was the most useful he'd felt in years. "You're good at this," Doc Wilson commented as they worked. Most men would have been long gone by now, Ryder shrugged. My wife, she was sick before she died. I learned a few things. The doctor nodded respectfully. This young lady's lucky you decided to help. Her uncle's got 5 young children at home, can't leave them for long. As night fell, Eliza's condition worsened. Her breathing became more labored and her fever climbed higher despite their efforts. Ryder watched as the doctor mixed various powders and tinctures, trying everything in his arsenal. Will she make it? Ryder asked quietly. Doc Wilson wiped his brow with a handkerchief. Hard to say. She's young and seems strong, but this illness has a fierce grip on her. The next 24 hours will tell. Thomas returned briefly to check on his niece and bring some of her belongings. I can't thank you enough for staying with her, he told Ryder. Eliza's all the family we have left from my wife's side. She came west to start fresh after losing her parents last year. Something about that struck a chord with Ryder. Here was someone else who had lost everything, yet she'd chosen to help others rather than wallow in her grief. I'll stay the night, Ryder found himself saying. You get back to your family. That night, as Doc Wilson caught a few hours of sleep in the chair beside his desk, Ryder maintained his vigil at Eliza's bedside. He bathed her forehead with cool water and spoke to her softly, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. You fight this, he whispered. You've got people who need you. In the dim lamplight, he studied her face, the gentle arch of her eyebrows, the sprinkling of freckles across her nose, the soft curve of her lips. Even in sickness, there was a strength to her features that spoke of resilience. Sometime after midnight, Eliza's eyes fluttered open. They were a startling emerald green, bright with fever but alert enough to focus on Ryder's face. Who? She rasped, her voice barely audible. Name's Ryder Daniels. You're at Doc Wilson's in Sweetwater. Your uncle brought you in. She closed her eyes, processing this information. Thirsty? Ryder held a cup of water to her lips, supporting her head as she drank. Small sips, he instructed. After she'd had enough, he eased her back onto the pillow. Her eyes found his again, searching his face with curious intensity. You're not a doctor, she whispered. No, madam. Then why are you here? It was a simple question without a simple answer. Why was he here, sitting beside a stranger's sick when he'd been ready to ride out of town that morning? I'm just helping out, he said finally. A ghost of a smile touched her lips before her eyes closed again, exhaustion claiming her. But her breathing seemed slightly easier now, and her skin felt a degree cooler under his palm. For the next 3 days, Ryder barely left Eliza's side. He helped Doc Wilson administer medicines, changed bedding soaked with sweat, and spooned broth into her mouth when she was able to take it. In between, he found himself talking to her first just to provide some comfort, then because it felt surprisingly natural. He told her about the places he'd seen in his travels, the towering peaks of the Rockies, the endless prairies of Kansas, the red rock canyons of Arizona Territory. He didn't tell her about the darker parts of his life, about the men he'd killed or the family he'd lost. But he did share small stories from before about fishing trips with his father and learning to break horses as a boy. On the 4th day, Eliza's fever finally broke. She woke with clear eyes and color returning to her cheeks. Doc Wilson pronounced her on the mend, though she'd need rest and care for at least another week. You've had quite a guardian angel, Miss Calloway, the doctor told her, nodding toward Ryder. This fella hasn't left your side since you got here. Eliza's eyes met Ryder's and something passed between them, a quiet understanding, a connection he couldn't explain. Thank you, she said simply. Ryder nodded awkwardly. Now that she was recovering, he felt suddenly out of place. I should be moving on, he muttered. Stay for supper at least, Doc Wilson insisted. My wife's bringing over some stew later, least we can do. That evening, sitting around the doctor's small table, Ryder learned more about Eliza Calloway. She'd been a schoolteacher in Boston before coming west to help her uncle's family after her aunt had injured her back in a fall. She spoke of her parents with quiet sadness, but also shared fond memories that made her eyes light up. They always encouraged curiosity, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. My father had a massive library. He believed women deserved education just as much as men. Progressive thinking, Doc Wilson commented. What about you, Mr. Daniels? Eliza asked. What brings you to Sweetwater? Ryder shifted uncomfortably, just passing through, to where, he hesitated. Hadn't decided yet. Something in her expression told him she understood more than he was saying. There was a perceptiveness to her that made him feel strangely exposed, as if she could see through the walls he'd built around himself. The next day, Thomas came to bring Eliza to his ranch to continue her recovery. Ryder helped her into the wagon, steadying her when she swayed slightly on her feet. I still feel so weak, she admitted with frustration. You nearly died, Ryder reminded her. Takes time to come back from that. She looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face. Will you be in town much longer, Mr. Daniels? He should say no, he knew. He should mount his horse and ride away, continuing the aimless journey he'd been on for years, but something held him back. I might stick around a few days, he found himself saying. Make sure you don't have a relapse. Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I'd like that. Thomas's ranch was a modest spread about 5 miles outside of town. His wife, Sarah, welcomed Eliza with open arms and warm blankets, settling her in a small bedroom that had been prepared for her arrival. To Ryder's surprise, Thomas offered him work. Could use an extra hand while Eliza recovers. My regular ranch hand broke his leg last month. The offer of temporary work gave Ryder the excuse he needed to stay. He found himself a spot in the bunkhouse and fell into the rhythm of ranch life, mending fences, rounding up strays, helping with the daily chores that kept the place running. Each evening, he'd check on Eliza, first formally through Sarah, then directly as Eliza regained her strength and began spending time on the porch, wrapped in quilts and watching the sunset. Tell me about another place you've seen, she'd ask, and Ryder would find himself describing the misty mountains of Tennessee or the wild coastline of California. One evening, about 2 weeks after they'd arrived at the ranch, Eliza was strong enough to take a short walk. Ryder offered his arm for support and they strolled slowly around the yard. You never talk about why you're wandering, she said after they'd been walking in comfortable silence. Everyone has a reason for running, Mr. Daniels. Ryder, he corrected her, and what makes you think I'm running? She gave him a knowing look. The sadness in your eyes, the way you never talk about home or family, the fact that you were ready to ride out of town the morning I fell ill. He stopped walking, surprised by her insight. You figured all that out while you were fighting pneumonia. I'm observant, she said with a small smile. And you talked quite a bit while I was drifting in and out of consciousness. I remember more than you might think. Ryder felt exposed but not uncomfortable. There was something about Eliza Calloway that made it easy to let down his guard, at least a little. I had a wife, he said finally, the words feeling rusty in his mouth, and a son. They died 3 years ago. Cholera swept through our town. Eliza's hand tightened on his arm. I'm so sorry, Ryder. After they were gone, there didn't seem much point in staying anywhere or in much of anything. They continued walking slowly, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Is that why you helped me? She asked softly. Because you couldn't save them. The question hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't examined his own motives too closely, but her words rang true. Maybe, he admitted, but that's not why I stayed. She looked up at him, a question in her eyes. I stayed because for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. Eliza stopped walking and turned to face him fully. Your life matters, Ryder, whether you believe it or not. The conviction in her voice made something shift inside him. For years, he'd been drifting, not caring whether he lived or died. But standing there with Eliza, watching the sunset paint her face in golden light, he felt a flicker of something he'd thought was long dead hope. As the days passed, Eliza grew stronger. She began helping Sarah with the children, 5-year-old twins Mary and Martha, 8-year-old James, 10-year-old William, and 12-year-old Samuel. The youngsters adored their cousin Eliza and her seemingly endless patience for their questions and games. Ryder found himself drawn into their family life almost against his will. William followed him around the ranch, eager to learn about horses and roping. Little James asked for stories of his travels. Even serious, Samuel sought his advice about training his new pup. One Saturday evening, Thomas announced they'd have a small gathering. "Neighbors are coming by for some music and dancing," he explained. "Nothing fancy, just folks getting together before winter sets in." Ryder's first instinct was to make himself scarce, but Eliza convinced him to stay. "You can't avoid people forever," she teased. "Besides, I'll need someone to dance with." The thought of holding Eliza in his arms for a dance made his heart beat faster. He told himself it was just nervousness about socializing. It had been years since he'd attended anything resembling a party, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. When the neighbors began arriving, 3 families from nearby ranches, plus Doc Wilson and his wife Ryder, hung back, watching as Eliza greeted everyone warmly. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and her chestnut hair was arranged in a neat bun with a few curls framing her face. She'd filled out a bit since her illness, her cheeks rosy with health instead of fever. Thomas had cleared the furniture from the main room, and one of the neighbors brought a fiddle. Soon, lively music filled the house, and couples took to the impromptu dance floor. Eliza found Ryder standing in the corner, nursing a cup of cider. "You promised me a dance, Mr. Daniels," she reminded him with a smile. "I'm not much of a dancer," he warned. "Neither am I, after being bedridden for so long. We can be terrible together." He couldn't help but smile at that. Setting down his cup, he offered her his hand. "In that case, Miss Calloway, may I have this dance?" As they joined the others for a lively reel, Ryder was surprised to find that his body remembered the steps from long-ago barn dances. Eliza moved gracefully despite her recent illness, her hand warm in his as they circled each other. When the music slowed to a waltz, Ryder hesitated, but Eliza stepped closer, placing one hand on his shoulder. He carefully set his hand at her waist, keeping a respectful distance between them. "You're doing fine," she murmured as they began to move in time with the music. "It's been a while," he admitted. "For me too," she said, her eyes meeting his. "My father used to say dancing is just walking in circles with style," Ryder chuckled. "Smart man, your father. He would have liked you," Eliza said softly. "He valued honesty and hard work above all else." As they waltzed around the room, Ryder was acutely aware of Eliza's presence, the subtle scent of lavender in her hair, the warmth of her hand in his, the trust in her eyes as she followed his lead. For the first time in years, he felt truly present in the moment, not lost in painful memories or numbed by whiskey. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were in bed, Ryder and Eliza sat on the porch swing, watching the stars. The October air had a crisp edge to it, and Eliza had wrapped a quilt around her shoulders. "Winter will be here soon," she commented, gazing up at the clear night sky. "You planning to stay through winter?" Ryder asked. She nodded. "Sarah still needs help with the children, especially with the baby coming in January." Ryder hadn't known about the pregnancy, though it explained why Thomas had been so desperate for help around the ranch. "What about you?" Eliza asked. "Will you keep moving on, or have you found a reason to stay?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ryder had been asking himself the same thing with increasing frequency. "I'm not sure I remember how to stay in one place," he admitted. "It's like riding a horse," she replied with a gentle smile. "You never really forget." Their conversation was interrupted by a coughing fit that seized Eliza, reminding them both of her recent illness. Ryder immediately moved closer, his hand on her back until the spasm passed. "You should get inside where it's warm," he said, concern evident in his voice. "I'm fine," she insisted, but allowed him to help her to her feet. At the door, she paused and looked up at him. "Thank you for the dance, Ryder. It was nice to feel normal again." On impulse, he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You're extraordinary, Eliza Calloway. There's nothing normal about you." A blush colored her cheeks, and for a moment they stood there in the doorway, something unspoken passing between them. Then she smiled and bid him good night, disappearing into the house. Ryder stood on the porch for a long time afterward, looking at the stars and contemplating the strange turn his life had taken. For 3 years, he'd been a ghost, moving through the world without really being part of it. Now, somehow, this woman was pulling him back into the land of the living, making him care again. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. November brought colder weather and the first snowfall of the season. Thomas's cattle needed extra attention as the grazing grew sparse, and Ryder found himself busier than ever. Eliza had fully recovered from her illness and was now teaching the children their lessons each morning and helping Sarah prepare for the baby. One evening, as Ryder was returning from checking the fences on the north pasture, he spotted Eliza sitting on a fallen log near the creek, sketchbook in hand. Curious, he guided his horse in her direction. "Bit cold for outdoor drawing, isn't it?" he called as he approached. She looked up with a smile that warmed him more than any fire could. "The light is different in winter. I wanted to capture it before the sun set." Dismounting, Ryder tied his horse to a nearby tree and came to sit beside her. The sketch showed the creek and the distant mountains, rendered with surprising skill. "You're talented," he said, genuinely impressed. "My mother taught me," Eliza explained, adding a few more lines to the sketch. She believed art was as important as mathematics or literature. "Another progressive idea." She was ahead of her time, Eliza agreed, a touch of sadness in her voice. "I miss her wisdom, especially now." "Why especially now?" Ryder asked. Eliza closed her sketchbook and looked at him directly. "Because she would know what to do when you find yourself falling in love with a man who's afraid to live again." The words hung in the cold air between them. Ryder felt his heart hammering in his chest, equal parts fear and longing coursing through him. "Eliza," he began, not even sure what he wanted to say. "You don't have to say anything," she interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know, I've lost people too, Ryder. I understand the fear of loving again, of risking that kind of pain, but I also know that hiding from life isn't really living." He really looked at her and saw the courage it had taken to speak those words. This woman who had faced death just weeks ago was braver than he had been in years. "I don't know if I can be what you deserve," he said honestly. "I'm not asking for promises," she replied. "I'm just asking you to try, to be open to possibilities." The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. In the golden light, Eliza's eyes seemed to hold all the warmth in the world. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Ryder leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question more than a statement. Eliza answered by leaning into him, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I'm scared," he admitted in a whisper. "So am I," she whispered back, "but I'm more afraid of never knowing what might have been." They rode back to the ranch together on Ryder's horse, Eliza seated in front of him, her back warm against his chest. Neither spoke much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with the possibility of a future Ryder hadn't dared to imagine until now. December brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for days at a time. The family drew closer together, spending evenings around the fire telling stories, playing games, or simply enjoying each other's company. Ryder, to his own surprise, found himself fully part of these gatherings, no longer the outsider watching from the periphery. His relationship with Eliza deepened as they found moments to be alone together, helping with chores in the barn, taking short walks when the weather permitted, sitting side by side during evening readings. They shared pieces of their pasts, building a bridge between their separate lives. Ryder told her about Maria, his wife, and little Thomas, his son, their names finally spoken aloud after years of being locked away in his heart. He described their small farm in Missouri, the life they'd built, and the devastating swiftness with which cholera had taken them both. "I wasn't even there," he confessed one night as they sat on the porch bundled against the cold. "I was in town selling our harvest when it hit. By the time I got back," his voice broke. "By the time I got back, Maria was already gone. Thomas died in my arms the next day." Eliza's hand found his, her fingers interlacing with his own. "It wasn't your fault, Ryder. I know that here," he said, tapping his temple, "but not here." He placed their joined hands over his heart. "Sometimes I think grief is just love with nowhere to go," Eliza said softly. "It doesn't diminish with time, we just build ourselves around it, make space for it to exist without consuming us." Her words resonated with something deep inside him. For the first time, Ryder could envision a future where his grief existed alongside joy rather than in place of it. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive spirit that even Ryder couldn't resist. The children were beside themselves with excitement, and Sarah, despite her advanced pregnancy, managed to coordinate special meals and small gifts for everyone. On Christmas Eve, after the children had finally been coaxed to bed with promises that morning would come sooner if they slept, the adults sat around the fire sipping hot cider. Thomas played carols on his harmonica while Sarah mended stockings for the morning. "I have something for you," Eliza told Ryder quietly, leading him to a quiet corner of the room. From her pocket, she withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "You didn't have to get me anything," Ryder protested. "I wanted to," she insisted, placing it in his hand. "Open it." Inside was a small leather-bound journal, its cover etched with a simple design of mountains and stars. "I noticed you sometimes write things down on scraps of paper," Eliza explained. "I thought you might like somewhere proper to keep your thoughts." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched him deeply. "Thank you," he said, running his fingers over the cover. "I haven't had anything like this since," he stopped himself. "Since before," she guessed, and he nodded. "I have something for you too," he admitted. From his vest pocket, he produced a small item wrapped in a handkerchief. Eliza unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicately carved wooden pendant on a leather cord. The pendant was in the shape of a wildflower, its petals detailed with remarkable precision. "Ryder, it's beautiful," she breathed, tracing the carving with her fingertip. "Did you make this?" He nodded. "Been working on it during evenings in the bunkhouse. Samuel loaned me his whittling knife." "I didn't know you could carve." "Neither did I," he admitted with a small smile. "Not until I tried for you." Eliza's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she asked him to help her put it on. The pendant rested just below her collarbone, catching the firelight as she moved. "Merry Christmas, Eliza," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Ryder," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him softly. New Year's Day brought an unexpected excitement when Sarah went into labor a week earlier than expected. Thomas rode for Doc Wilson through the snow while Ryder kept the children occupied in the barn, showing them how to care for the new calves. Eliza remained with Sarah, her face calm but her eyes betraying her nervousness when she came to give them updates. "The doctor's here now," she told Ryder late in the afternoon. "He says everything looks normal, just taking its time." As evening fell, the children were fed and settled in the bunkhouse with Ryder, giving the main house over to the business of bringing new life into the world. He told them stories to distract them from their worry, spinning tales of far-off places and exciting adventures until the younger ones drifted off to sleep. Samuel, the oldest, remained awake, his young face serious in the lantern light. "Is Mama going to be all right?" he asked when the others were asleep. Ryder considered the boy thoughtfully. "Your mother is strong and Doc Wilson is a good physician. They're doing everything they can." Samuel nodded, accepting the honest answer rather than empty reassurances. "Miss Eliza said you lost your family. Is that why you were so sad when you first came here?" The direct question, asked with a child's innocent curiosity, caught Ryder off guard. "Yes," he answered simply. "That's why." "But you're not as sad now," Samuel observed. "No, I guess I'm not. Because of Miss Eliza." The boy was perceptive beyond his years. Ryder smiled slightly. "Partly because of her, and partly because of all of you, your family reminded me what it's like to belong somewhere." Samuel seemed satisfied with this answer and finally drifted off to sleep. Ryder remained awake, listening to the howling wind outside and thinking about how much had changed in just a few months. Shortly after midnight, the bunkhouse door opened, letting in a blast of cold air and a beaming Eliza. "It's a boy," she announced, her face flushed with excitement. "Everyone's doing well. The children woke at the news, their sleepy faces breaking into grins as they peppered Eliza with questions about their new brother. She assured them they could see the baby in the morning and herded them back to bed. When they were settled again, she collapsed beside Ryder on the bench near the stove, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "You were amazing today," he told her, putting his arm around her. She leaned against him gratefully. "I was terrified. I've never helped with a birth before." "You didn't show it," he assured her. "You kept everyone calm, including me," she smiled tiredly. "They're naming him Robert after Sarah's father." "Good, strong name," Ryder approved. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance behind the stove's glass door. Outside, the wind had died down, and the world seemed hushed, as if in recognition of the new life that had just entered it. "I want this," Eliza said suddenly, her voice soft but certain. "Want what? A family, children, a home." She turned to look at him, vulnerability and determination mingled in her expression. "I want a life, Ryder, a real one, not just existing day to day, and I want it with you if you'll have me." The directness of her declaration left him momentarily speechless. In another lifetime, he might have run from such honesty, such clear expectation. But the man he had become, or perhaps the man he was rediscovering, knew what a rare gift he was being offered. "I'm not the same man I was before I lost my family," he said carefully. "I might never be that man again." "I don't want that man," Eliza replied. "I want you as you are now, with all your scars and broken pieces. I'm not perfect either, Ryder. I have my own ghosts, my own fears. But I think we could make something good together." He looked into her eyes, seeing the future he'd been afraid to imagine, mornings waking beside her, children with her green eyes and stubborn chin, a home filled with laughter and, yes, sometimes tears, but never emptiness. Never the hollow void he'd been carrying for so long. "I love you, Eliza Calloway," he said, the words feeling right as they left his lips. "And yes, I want that life too, with you." The kiss they shared sealed the promise between them, not of a perfect life, but of one worth living, worth fighting for. The following spring brought new beginnings. Thomas's ranch flourished under the care of both men, and Sarah recovered well from the birth, doting on baby Robert while keeping her lively brood in line. Eliza continued teaching the children, now including lessons outdoors as the weather improved. In late April, Ryder and Eliza were married in a simple ceremony at the local church, with Thomas and Sarah standing as witnesses and the children participating as attendants. Doc Wilson and his wife attended, along with the neighbors who had come to know and respect the former drifter who'd found a home among them. Eliza wore a dress of pale blue silk that Sarah had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Ryder, clean-shaven and wearing a new suit, waited for her at the altar with an expression of wonder that made the women in attendance dab at their eyes. "Never thought I'd see the day," Doc Wilson commented to his wife. "When that man rode into Sweetwater last fall, he had the look of someone just waiting for death to find him." "Amazing what the right woman can do," his wife replied with a knowing smile. The couple exchanged simple vows, promising to cherish and support each other through whatever life brought their way. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Ryder kissed his bride with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the journey they'd traveled together. The celebration afterward was held at Thomas's ranch, with tables set up in the yard under budding trees. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and at the center of it all, Ryder and Eliza moved through the crowd hand in hand, their happiness palpable to everyone who saw them. As the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the valley, Ryder led Eliza away from the festivities to a quiet spot near the creek, the same place where she had been sketching when she first told him of her feelings. "I have something to show you," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. Taking her hand, he led her a little further along the bank to where a stand of cottonwoods created a natural alcove. There, partially hidden by the trees, stood a small cabin, newly built with logs still golden in color. "Ryder," Eliza breathed, her eyes wide with surprise. "When did you do this?" "Thomas and I have been working on it whenever we could spare time," he explained. It's not fancy, but it's ours, our start. Tears filled Eliza's eyes as she stepped forward to touch the solid logs, peer through the windows at the simple furnishings inside, run her hand along the porch railing that had been sanded smooth. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Our home." "There's something else," Ryder said, leading her around to the back of the cabin where a small fenced garden had been prepared, the soil freshly turned. "I remember you saying your mother loved gardening. Thought you might want to plant some flowers, maybe some vegetables too." Eliza turned to him, her face radiant with joy and love. "You thought of everything?" "I had help," he admitted. "Sarah gave me a list of things a home needs, but I wanted to surprise you." "You succeeded," she said with a laugh, throwing her arms around his neck. "I can't believe you kept this secret." "It wasn't easy," he assured her, holding her close. "Especially with 5 children who knew about it." They stood together in the fading light, on land that was now theirs, beside the home they would share. Birds called to each other in the trees above them, and the creek gurgled peacefully nearby. "Are you happy, Ryder?" Eliza asked softly, her head resting against his chest. He considered the question, thinking of the man he had been when he rode into Sweetwater empty, hollow, caring for nothing and no one, least of all himself. The contrast with the man he was now, standing on his own land with his wife in his arms and possibilities stretching before them, was stark. "I'm more than happy," he answered truthfully. "I'm alive again." Their new life together unfolded with the seasons. The small cabin became a home filled with Eliza's sketches on the walls, books they read together in the evenings, and furniture Ryder crafted with increasing skill. The garden flourished under Eliza's care, providing vegetables for their table and flowers that she arranged in jars on the windowsills. They worked hard, Ryder continuing to help Thomas with the ranch while starting improvements on their own small parcel of land. Eliza teaching the children and keeping a close eye on Sarah and the baby. But their evenings were their own, spent talking, reading, planning, or simply sitting together on the porch watching the stars come out. In late summer, Eliza shared news that changed everything. Once again, they were expecting a child of their own. The announcement brought both joy and a shadow of fear to Ryder's eyes. "Are you worried?" Eliza asked that night as they lay in bed, her head on his shoulder. "A little," he admitted, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "I couldn't bear to lose you." "You won't," she assured him, though they both knew such promises couldn't truly be kept. "Doc Wilson says I'm healthy as a horse and Sarah's already planning to help when the time comes." Ryder nodded, drawing her closer. "I never expected to have another chance at fatherhood," he said quietly. "I want to do it right this time." "You will," Eliza told him with complete confidence. "We both will." As autumn painted the valley in golds and reds, Ryder expanded their cabin, adding a small room for the baby. Thomas helped with the construction, the 2 men working side by side with an easy camaraderie that had developed over the past year. "You've changed this place," Thomas commented one day as they took a break, looking out over the ranch and the small homestead Ryder and Eliza were building. "Brought life back to it?" "It's Eliza who did that," Ryder replied. Thomas shook his head. "It was both of you. She needed someone to love just as much as you did. 2 broken hearts healing each other." The wisdom of the older man's words stayed with Ryder as winter approached again. He watched Eliza's body change as their child grew within her, marveling at the miracle of it. Her illness seemed a distant memory now, though he still sometimes woke in the night to check that she was breathing easily beside him. Christmas came again, this time celebrated in their own home with Thomas's family joining them for dinner. The cabin was decorated with pine boughs and red berries that Eliza and the children had gathered, and candles glowed in every window. As they sat around the table, Ryder looked at the faces illuminated by candlelight, Thomas and Sarah with baby Robert on her lap, the 5 older children trying to mind their manners, and Eliza at the other end of the table, her face serene above her growing belly. This was family, he realized. Not just by blood or marriage, but by choice and circumstance, by shared joys and sorrows. When the others had gone home and the dishes were washed and put away, Ryder and Eliza sat by the fire, her feet in his lap as he massaged them gently. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for the foot rub." He asked with a smile, "For everything, for staying when you could have ridden away, for being brave enough to love again, for our home, our baby, our life together." Ryder's hands stilled as he looked at her, still struck sometimes by how much he loved this woman who had quite literally brought him back to life. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," he said. "You saved me, Eliza, in every way a person can be saved." She shook her head, smiling. "We saved each other." In February, as a late winter storm howled outside, Eliza went into labor. Unlike Sarah's experience, hers progressed too quickly for Thomas to fetch Doc Wilson through the blizzard conditions. "The baby's coming now," Sarah announced after checking on Eliza. "We'll have to manage ourselves." Ryder, who had faced gunfights and stampeding cattle with steady nerves, found himself terrified as he held Eliza's hand through her pain. She gripped him with surprising strength, her face contorted with effort. "Talk to me," she gasped between contractions. "Distract me." So he did, telling her about the plans he had for spring planting, about the colt that had been born the week before, about anything he could think of to keep her mind off the pain. And through it all, she held his gaze, drawing strength from his presence. When their daughter finally arrived, her lusty cry filling the cabin, Ryder felt tears streaming down his face. Sarah cleaned and wrapped the infant before placing her in Eliza's arms. "She's perfect," Eliza whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. The baby had a dusting of dark hair, and when she briefly opened her eyes, they appeared to be the same deep green as her mother's. "What shall we call her?" Ryder asked, gently touching his daughter's cheek with one finger. Eliza looked up at him with tired but radiant eyes. "I was thinking Grace," she said, "because that's what she is, a gift we didn't expect but are so blessed to receive." "Grace," Ryder repeated, testing the name. "Grace Daniels, I like it." As the storm continued outside, the little family huddled together in the warmth of their home. Ryder marveled at the twists and turns that had brought him here, how close he had come to missing all of this by simply riding away that day in Sweetwater. If Eliza hadn't fallen ill, if he hadn't stayed to help, if she hadn't been brave enough to reach through his defenses. So many moments that could have gone differently, leading him down a path of continued emptiness instead of to this perfect moment. "What are you thinking?" Eliza asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "I'm thinking about how differently things might have gone," he admitted. "If I'd left town that morning." "But you didn't," she reminded him. "You chose to help, to care, and every day since then, you've kept choosing life instead of just existing." He nodded, looking down at their daughter sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "Best choice I ever made," he said softly. As spring arrived once more, bringing new growth and color to the valley, Ryder stood on the porch of their cabin with Grace in his arms, watching Eliza plant flowers along the garden fence. The baby was 3 months old now, thriving under their care, her personality beginning to emerge in gummy smiles and curious eyes. Eliza looked up, catching him watching her, and smiled that same smile that had first pierced through his carefully constructed walls. She stood, dusting soil from her hands, and came to join them on the porch. "She's getting heavy," Eliza commented, touching their daughter's cheek. "Strong like her mother," Ryder replied. Eliza laughed. "Stubborn like her father." They stood together, looking out over the land that was slowly becoming a proper farm. Ryder had added chickens and a milk cow and was talking of building a larger barn come summer. There was always more work to be done, more plans to make, more life to live. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't gotten sick that day?" Eliza asked, echoing his earlier thoughts. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I'd probably still be drifting, half alive at best." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "And I might never have known what it feels like to be truly loved." Ryder shifted Grace to one arm so he could wrap the other around Eliza. "I didn't care if I lived or died back then," he said quietly. "Now I want to live forever, if it means having days like this with you both." As if understanding the importance of the moment, Grace chose that instant to let out a happy gurgle, reaching up to pat her father's face with a chubby hand. Both parents laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful valley that had become their home. "Forever sounds about right," Eliza agreed, stretching up to kiss him softly. "But I'll settle for one day at a time, one day at a time." It was how Ryder had survived after losing his first family, just getting through each day, one after another, without any real purpose. Now those same words had an entirely different meaning, savoring each moment, building memories, creating a legacy of love that would outlast them both. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold, Ryder Daniels held his family close and gave thanks for second chances, and for the woman whose illness had saved his life in ways neither of them could have imagined.